My name is Brian Kaylor, and I'm a Baptist minister. I lead Word&Way, which is a Christian nonprofit here in Missouri since 1896. And I am opposed to this bill. I've been here several years to oppose, first when it was a standalone measure on houses of worship, and now the last couple of years when that part has been kind of molded into this larger bill. This is really significant problem. I mean, frankly, I have a lot of problems with the bill overall, but I'm going to focus on the houses of worship provisions here. The targeting of houses of worship is a really significant problem. As has been noted, currently, we don't have a problem on this. If a house of worship wants to allow concealed carry, they can. And the person who makes that decision is the minister or appropriate leader of the congregation. Right? They can decide whether or not they will allow one or anyone to conceal carry into their house of worship. If you, by targeting house of worship and removing that provision, you're flipping the default status. And so now houses of worship have two options. They either have to allow concealed carry, and let's be very clear, there are some religious groups that have sincerely held religious beliefs against the use of armed force, against allowing weapons of violence into their holy sanctuaries. Right? And so we have to be really careful when we start treading on religious liberty rights such as that. Now, their other option, by removing them from the default category, they would now have to require, if they don't want concealed carry, their only option is the posting of massive signs on every single entranceway. Now, when we start mandating what a house of worship has to post, again, as the government needs to have a compelling reason and needs to prove that there was not a better, less onerous way to accomplish the same purpose. The better, less onerous way is the status quo. Right, where the individuals can make that decision, the individual congregations, and no one has to post anything. There's no mandated speech from the government onto houses of worship. What's particularly wild about this legislation is that only houses of worship are being targeted. Right, there's actually a number of categories right now where there's a default ban on concealed carry. But by only targeting houses of worship, we're saying that houses of worship now will have less say over their own facilities, their own First Amendment rights, than liquor stores, riverboat gambling operations, and amusement parks. What are we doing? Riverboat gambling operations, amusement parks, and liquor stores have more First Amendment rights than houses of worship would have if this legislation moves forward. This is a significant problem. I've been here multiple years. There have been other clergy that have been here multiple years, always testifying against this legislation. This is something I strongly urge that at the very minimum that you would strip these sections out. But again, I think the real solution is to remove the entire bill. It's very problematic. I'm happy to answer any questions. I would note we've heard a lot of talk about God-given rights. And if we want to talk about God-given rights, that's the right to worship. That's the God right here, right? Moses didn't get any AK-47s on Mount Sinai. Right? When we're talking about God rights, we're talking about the First Amendment and what's happening in houses of worship. And the Second Amendment does not trump the First Amendment, and I find this targeting of houses of worship to be highly problematic.
Questions for this committee member? Representative Engel.
Good afternoon.
Hello.
Nice to see you again. Thank you for talking about the First Amendment. I want to talk a little bit more about that because we talk about the, freedom of religion, freedom of assembly. There's also freedom of association, and I'm also not a lawyer, but I make laws. And so I try to learn as much as I possibly can about that. Churches have the ability to excommunicate folks. They get to pick who assembles within them. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. And also there are legal options too. So it's not just a spiritual decision where a church could ask someone to leave. If someone refuses to leave because it's private property, churches could actually get restraining orders and prevent people. So you do not actually have an automatic religious liberty right to enter into any house of worship. Instead, because it's private property, communities of individuals also have collective First Amendment rights to decide who can come and gather.
Okay. And I just want to reiterate, if there is a church that wants to allow folks to carry, are they well within their legal, well within the law to do that?
That's correct. They can.
Okay. So all this would do would force churches against their religious beliefs to allow guns on their premises. Is that right?
That's right. They have one of two options.
Okay.
They either have to allow it or they have to post messages communicating something the government has told them to communicate.
Has this law been put into effect in any other state? that you're aware of?
That's a great question. I know there have been debates about guns in houses of worship. I do believe there have been a couple of states that have gone down this road, but I don't recall if they passed all the way through. Like,
Yeah, I'd love to see what the Supreme Court would say about that. What's more important, religion or guns? I guess I would like to see that answer as well. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any other questions for this witness? Representative Gregg?
Thank you. Just a little background here. I'm not a lawyer either, and I do the same thing she does. But back in 1999, I lived 5 minutes from Wedgwood Baptist Church. They were shot up. Somebody came in, killed 7. 4 of them were youth. One of them was a stepdaughter of one of my youth workers. It was very close to home. Then in 1917, I believe it was, Sutherland Springs Baptist Church in Texas had a gunman go in, killed 26. In 2019, September, they passed a law in the state of Texas that said parishioners can carry their guns into churches. 3 months later, December of 19, a gentleman walked into a church in White Settlement, Texas. He only got 2, and he was taken out by a parishioner, not on the security team, but someone who was in worshiping like everybody else, and he did his God-given right to protect himself and others. I'm having a tough time not accepting the premise that this is a constitutional right, and nowhere in the United States is our constitutional right not allowed. I'll admit there are lots of issues that I do see with this bill, but I'm not following the church discussion here so much.
Yeah, maybe I can try to clarify that. So first of all the things you just said, all those strategies are why houses of worship might decide today to allow concealed carry or even have police officers. So you don't need to pass this if your concern is to try to protect houses of worship from a mass shooting. They already have that power. They can already allow concealed carry right now. It's not that it's banned. It's that the house of worship can decide for itself whether it wants to allow that. So that freedom is already there for each congregation. However, when we're talking about constitutional rights don't end anywhere, but the First Amendment rights definitely don't end in the house of worship, right? So there are religious communities that their religious faith teaches nonviolence.
Correct.
Right? And so we, as the state, don't have the right to overrule that and tell them that religious right is less important than the Second Amendment. And so, all of the concerns you have, I understand, and there's not a need to fix that.
I guess I need to point out, you said the First Amendment should not be superseded by the Second Amendment, and vice versa. One does not cancel out the other. So, like I said, I do have some issues with this bill that needs to be fixed, corrected, or maybe brought back next year. Who knows? But I believe by not treading on one over the other, like you're saying, the second should not supersede, but the first should not supersede the second as well. So, personally, maybe we should just give the churches the opportunity to post if they want to. Churches post things that's mandated by the government. I personally go to a church that has to post things in their kitchen for preparation of food. That's mandated by the government. They have to do that.
Yes.
I'm just pointing out things that you've been saying.
It's not an outside message. So like I said, the government can require. You can require them to post how many people can be in the building, right? Like a fire
code,
right?
Correct.
Right? But you have to have a compelling reason, and the government has to prove. This is First Amendment jurisprudence. You have to prove that there wasn't a better solution to get there. And again, let's be very clear here.
I think a better solution is that only 2 people were killed in 2019 after the state of Texas already allowed that when 24 were killed before that law.
Yeah, but we already allow it. So we don't have to allow churches to allow concealed carry. That's already allowed right now.
Right now, we're saying the churches can cancel your Second Amendment rights, when Second Amendment should apply everywhere. So,
well, it says not allowed in liquor stores or amusement parks. Or
I'm not disagreeing you. I'm not disagreeing there. I said there are some things with this bill that I do disagree
your
with.
time has expired.
Thank you very much.
On your 3 minutes. The witness does have remaining time if any other representatives have questions for him. Representative Dean.
Thank you, Chair. To inquire.
Proceed.
Thank you. So as I mentioned earlier, I grew up actually in a Baptist church. And at the time that I was growing up, guns were not allowed, except for by very specific people that were determined by our leadership. I can say, because I was very involved in the church, my mother served as the assistant director of the daycare there, so I was there every time the door was open, we were there. I knew the individuals that were carrying guns myself. Most people did not know that, which I think is great, and I think that that's probably the way that it should be, in the sense that everybody should feel comfortable whether you like guns or not. If you feel comfortable holding a gun on your person, you have the right to do that in the United States. If you don't want to have a gun or don't want to be in the space of a gun, you have the right to either be in that space or not. So I think it comes back to this idea that property rights are also very important. Your personal property rights, your right to make your own decisions on the personal property in which you own. So do you, as a pastor, feel, and I feel like you've made this pretty clear, but just to clarify, that the idea that we are going to tell you that you have to allow people to do this thing on the private property that is owned by your congregation is an impediment on your personal property rights?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, I appreciate that question. And I do think it's important to note that, I also think it would be a problem if the government said that houses of worship couldn't allow it.
Oh, I agree.
Right? But right now, the government does allow houses of worship to make that decision. I think the status quo is the best solution to this question.
Yeah. So essentially, we are fixing a problem that doesn't exist.
Right, and creating
a new problem. Okay. Thank you. I appreciate your time.
Any other questions for this witness? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony today.